All right, hi everybody. I am doing, well, this speech on my main claim is the legalization of drugs would improve society by reducing crime, violence, and deaths related to the drugs. Okay, so the war on drugs has caused many issues to people, many issues to people around it. Basically, crime has not gone down. The streets aren't safer in shady neighborhoods, and people are not using any less drugs than they would be were they legal or not. Prohibition in the 20s did not work, and it raised the amount of violence during that time. So my layout would be, without the war on drugs, there would be less crime. Ending the war on drugs would free up tax dollars and actually create tax revenue, and well, drug use would become safer. Okay, so the first, so the lessening of crime, an article on the University of Illinois at Chicago website said that lethal violence is more likely to be related to drug trades than gang rivalries. So basically what that means is a lot of the violence that is on the streets is usually for turf. So people don't want to lose their customer base, so they end up having a gang war. And then later on in that article, it says that drug-related violence represents about 1/3 to 1/2 of all gang violence. So basically, that's bringing up the same point that most violence on the streets is related to drugs, one way or another, whether it's through turf or just in violence. What is it? The Bureau of Justice Statistics says that in 2004, about 17% of state prisoners and 18% of inmates were there because they committed an offense that was related to trying to get money for drugs. And then drug smuggling, of course, would be completely destroyed after this point was, or if the fact that drugs would become legal. Okay, so, and then ending the war on drugs would also free up a lot of money. More than half of the prisoners were drug offenders, and there are about 208,000 federal inmates. Each inmate costs about $26,163 on average. So you guys can do the math on that. That's billions of dollars being spent each year on federal inmates. And in 2014, USA Today, released a report that tax revenues for Colorado, just on marijuana alone, not on all drugs, was about $63 million, which was put back into, a percentage of that was put back into the school system directly. Okay, and then my next point, my last point, drug use would become safer because drug paraphernalia, like needles for heroin use and other drugs that use needles, clean needles would be readily available, meaning that the spread of hepatitis and HIV would decline. And again, no one is denying that drug use is dangerous. Over-the-counter drugs can be dangerous as well. And one of the biggest drugs, meth or crystal, needs pseudoephedrins to be able to be produced. And that drug, the pseudoephedrine chemical, actually comes from a lot of cold medicines, Sudafed being one of them, of course. And then any drug that is produced underground, not in a safe lab, will be dangerous. I mean, during Prohibition in the 1920s, Time magazine has an article stating that alcohol made at that time did contain chemicals that killed hundreds of people and then left many more hundreds with irreversible damage, such as blindness or just problems with their internal organs. And then finally, my last point is just that the legalization of drugs would have an effect in which we could now be able to regulate the drugs more. So younger kids would not be able to obtain the drugs as easily as they can right now, just by going to the street corner and asking somebody where they can find something. And my concluding statement is basically that legalizing drugs would bring a different light to this world. We would have safer neighborhoods, less organized crime, of course. Jails would not be as overcrowded as they are. And drug-related deaths through violence or abuse would be greatly reduced. This is a necessary step forward to a necessary step forward into a better world. Thank you.
All right, Jonathan, the proposition is clearly stated at the beginning. You actually have your preview sort of built into the end of the proposition, so it's got, technically it's got multiple claims in it, but I understand that it's really the preview structure for the speech, so I think you'd still want to be a little bit more careful about that, but it doesn't hurt you too much. I don't think there's much doubt that there's controversy on this particular subject. The thing that is controversial, though, I think, is somewhat neglected. In other words, you talk about what the negatives are here, but we're talking about, is there going to be an on-balance improvement? You say it's going to reduce crime, violence, and deaths related to drugs. Well, it might reduce, for instance, the crimes that are associated with gangs fighting over turf or customers, but is it going to have an impact on the crimes committed by people under the influence of drugs? We don't really get much explanation of that, and there's not any comparative data on that, and you're making a claim that's going to have an overall reduction on crime, so I think you need to have some comparative data there. I thought that the speech was nicely organized, although I did think that you rushed kind of the points that you're presenting. You need to have a little bit smoother transitions on those points in the body of the speech. You started off pretty well with a couple of statistical references, and I thought that was helpful. You did cite the Bureau of Justice statistics at one point, and then you had, at another point, you mentioned the Time Magazine article, although it sounds like it's a ways in the past, talking about the impact of bathtub gin on hundreds of people dying. I think that was an interesting point. There is some other information that's presented that I think is a little bit thin and needs to have better proof on it. How big an impact is $63 million, for instance? If that's going to be a benefit, I mean, if it was $63 million to me, that would be pretty damn substantial, but the state of Colorado's educational system, I don't know how much they spend. $63 million might be their budget for breakfast, and I'm not sure that that's important. It may be, but I don't get any comparative explanation about, how much better the state is doing as a result of legalizing even just marijuana. There's some hypothetical stuff on the clean needles and the quality control issues. I think there's an assumption that how legalization would have to work in order to produce those outcomes, but I didn't really get any information that suggested that it was the illegality of drugs that causes problems from these issues as well. The comparison to legal drugs, I think, is a little problematic in that there's a function for the legal drugs that you cite as opposed to there's only one function for the drugs that you're talking about being legalized, and the notion that people, that people should be able to have meth or cocaine or heroin or any of those sorts of things. I think there may be some value arguments based here, and that people have a right to do whatever the heck they want to their bodies. But I think when you talk about what the impact on people's bodies would be, that people would see substantial drawbacks to the points that you're talking about, unless you mitigate them to some degree. I thought you had a really good summary at the end of the speech, though, trying to make a last-minute argument for your position that kind of gives us a good exit punch, and I thought that worked well. All right, thank you.